Somewhat recently, there was a YouTube makeup challenge that tasked people with doing their makeup in LED lighting set to not white lights. James Charles started this challenge after being inspired by people on TikTok. Others, like Nikki Tutorials, took part. In this challenge, participants are encouraged to use makeup that they aren't familiar with so they can't cheat and create a well put together look that way. The final looks were not what they were expecting, and their reactions were pretty funny. At the end of hers, Nikki even asked,
"Oh my god, what happened?"
Well, good news. I've got answers. So let's have us another perception video, shall we? This video made possible by the continuing support of viewers, patrons, a guy on PayPal, and now somebody on Ko-fi like you. Thanks! Hi, welcome back to the channel. To get it out of the way right off the bat, yes, this image is in black and white, and it's by design. Something's not going wrong. Watch to the end of the video to find out why. Hashtag not clickbait. In this video, we are going to once again dip our toes into psychophysics. And if you're new to the channel, I'm a cognitive psychologist, but I've also dabbled a fair bit into perception. And so in this video, we're going to explain why the LED makeup challenge was a challenge beyond just that it was hard to get the colors right in the not white lighting. We're not going to go terribly into the specifics for the mechanisms at play here, just noting that they happen. I am planning on going into those specifics at some point in the future, just not in this video. If you find this edutainful, please leave a like and maybe consider subscribing for more entertainment content in the future. You can also find me on Twitter, Discord, or Patreon. Links for those are in the description box, and I swear I'm going to stop talking about this soon, but we're coming up on the 1-year birthday for this channel, and I'm doing a little thing to celebrate and opening up to patrons first. So if you would like one of these little somethings, hit up my Patreon. Alright, let's talk color vision. There are many parts to our eyes. Light is focused by the cornea and lens onto the retina. The retina contains the photoreceptors that absorb the light coming in. Photoreceptors are able to absorb these photons because the photoreceptors contain a pigment specifically for that purpose. Once a photoreceptor has absorbed a photon, a packet of light energy, it goes through a configurational change that results in an electric neural signal being sent upstream for additional processing. An important thing to note here is that the type of photoreceptor is essentially integrated into the information being sent. So the signals from the different varieties of photoreceptors are almost tagged according to their variety. Also, for demonstration purposes, just note that we're assuming that one photon absorbed equals one signal sent by that photoreceptor. Biological systems can be a bit more noisy than that, but for illustrative purposes, it's a close enough approximation. There are two types of photoreceptors, rods and cones. The rods support lower light vision and are more sensitive to movement, but they aren't really able to help build up the color representation. The cones are the workhorses supporting color vision. Most people have 3 types of cones, making them trichromats. On this plot, we have the wavelength of light along the x-axis, the proportion of light absorbed by the cone type along the y-axis, and the curves represent the relative absorption at those different wavelengths for the 3 cone types. All 3 cone types' different absorption peaks and curves are due to having slightly different pigments in those cone types. One is more suited to absorbing colors in the blue range. These are referred to as S receptors, as their peak absorption is in the shorter wavelength end of the visual spectrum. You'll note that the S receptor's peak is a bit further away from the other 2 cone types. More on that in a sec. The other 2 cone types are better at absorbing colors in the green to lemon-lime range. The M receptors are good for the middle wavelength colors, and the L receptors are more sensitive to the longer than middle wavelength colors. Quick trivia that will be expanded on in a future video. Our current understanding of this overlap between the M and L receptors is that a common ancestor of modern mammals running around in dino times had 2 cone types, and many mammals to this day are dichromats, or having 2 cone types. Cats and dogs are easy examples. At some point, an Old World ape common ancestor experienced a beneficial gene duplication, with a little variation on that dupe, in the middle wavelength region, which left the organism with 2 slightly different cones in that part of the spectrum. This gave the organism greater ability to discriminate between colors relevant for survival. And there's a couple theories trying to explain why. Some of them include things like maybe this extra cone type gave the organism a greater ability in spotting ripe fruit hidden among the assorted foliage of the plant it's on, or maybe this extra cone type made it easier to spot predators even if they're camouflaged. Having that extra cone can give you the little edge that means the difference between life or death. But this is a science tale for another day. When someone is colorblind, they're missing at least one type of cone. And you may have heard this before, but color blindness is a misnomer. Odds are, the person isn't seeing everything in black and white, but rather the color space that their cones can put together. What the heck do I mean by that? Well, fortunately it's related to the central point I'm getting at, so let me explain. We see things because our eyes absorb the light that's reflected off of what we're looking at. Let's start by breaking that sentence down. We covered the absorption part with the photoreceptors turning a photon into a signal. Now let's talk about the light. The visual spectrum is the range of the electromagnetic spectrum that we're able to see unaided. We can make sources of pure red or blue or whatever colored light and give people color percepts that way. But for the most part, we aren't just sitting there staring at lights all day. Unless your profession involves the use of a ring light, then that's definitely a possibility. But for the most part, we're looking at objects around us. When you're looking at an object, you're seeing the light that wasn't absorbed by the object itself. Note, the sun puts out roughly the full visual spectrum, so it's a good approximation of white light. Let's use the go-to example. Nice red apple. So, in natural light, the pigment in the apple's skin is absorbing all of the light that isn't in the reddish wavelengths. So the light that hasn't been absorbed by the apple's pigment is reflected off in all the directions, and if you're looking at it, some of that light will end up in your eye. Then, the light gets directed back to your retina and the cones get to work. The S receptors can't really absorb red, so they won't be absorbing these apple-y photons and going through the communication process indicating that they'd seen something. The M receptors will likely absorb some, although not as much as the L receptors. Upstream, a calculation of sorts is done. No response from the S receptors, a meh response from the M receptors, and a moderately strong response from the L receptors means you're looking at something red. Second example, a blue flower under natural lighting. As with the apple, the pigments in the flower's petals are absorbing everything except the blue wavelengths of light. As such, the blue is reflected off and into your eager eyeball. Now, the S receptors are in the game. They are absorbing bunches of photons. The M receptors, for this shade of blue, are also absorbing a fair bit of these photons. The L receptors, while absorbing some, aren't absorbing as much as the M receptors. Back upstream, another comparison between firing activity is done. Fairly strong response from the S, a similar response from the M, and a weak but present response from the L receptors means you're looking at something blue. What about a white mushroom? Our perception of white happens when all cone types are absorbing equivalent amounts of photons. Which makes sense, as the full visual spectrum of light is being thrown at them. Finally, a black cat is truly a light void. The pigments in the cat's fur are absorbing most of the light, so not much is bounced off. As such, there's not much activity from any of the cone types, and that absence of response outputs as black. Now let's bring this back to what's happening in the LED makeup challenge videos. What happens when the light isn't white? Well, that comparison between the activity levels of the three cone types is still being done, just now the information going into it is skewed. Since James Charles and Nicky, among others, used red light, we'll go with that. Let's revisit the examples from before in this new light. Our juicy red apple still has the same red pigment in its skin. That pigment is still absorbing all wavelengths of light that aren't red. Although under red lighting, there won't be those non-red wavelengths to absorb, but Mr. Apple don't care. As before, light bounces into eye onto retina. The S receptors have nothing to work with, so no activity. The M receptors will absorb less than the L receptors, as was the case under white light. Upstream calculation of no S, meh M, and moderate response from L receptors outputs red, like before. So, this red apple still looks red. The blue flower's pigments are still absorbing all non-blue light, but now there's only red light. So the blue pigment is basically absorbing all of the light being shown on it. As a consequence, not much of anything is bouncing. This leads to the cones not having photons to work with, which means they'll be sending information that will look computationally like the black cat's fur. Therefore, the blue flower will look very dark, if not black, and more on that in a second. The white mushroom's pigments are not absorbing the light coming at it, so the red light will be bounced off mostly intact. Bounced to retina process, and the cones will be experiencing similar patterns to the red apple. S receptors, no activity, M receptors, low activity, L receptors, moderate activity, so the output for this white mushroom is that it will look red. Finally, the black cat's fur is still light hungry, so the red light isn't being reflected. Bada bing bada boom, black cat still looks black. Once you understand the comparisons happening between the different cone types and how that can be impacted by the color quality of light coming in, you can work out how different colored things will look in different colored lights, as you're going to be doing in this video. There is a wrinkle here that the BeauTubers either intuitively or intentionally avoided. While we have evolved as mostly diurnal creatures and therefore taking full advantage of the sun's white light in perceiving color, sometimes that light can go a little funny on us. At different times of day, the light can shift, like when the sun is setting and things take on a warmer hue. But our perception of the color of things doesn't drastically shift. Why is that? This is due to a perceptual feature called color constancy. So, once you know an object is a certain color, like apple is red, the object file in your memory gets a tag for that color. When that object is taken into different lighting conditions, the true color may look muted or tinted, but we'll still perceive it as that tagged color. This is why in the makeup challenge videos, James and Nikki didn't look like they were wearing red face paint. We know what their skin tends to look like, and so our brain compensates as best it can for the change in lighting. So it's interesting to me that part of this challenge was to use makeups that you're not as familiar with. They were essentially avoiding your color constancy biasing whatever choices you might make to pull together a look. That's also why my portions in this video so far have been in black and white. I know I grumbled in the astrology video that a classroom demo just isn't going to work online, but it's a two-way street. I have complete control over how you're seeing me, the lighting, the format, everything, and so I have some freedom to do things that would never work in a classroom setting. I'm still using the same camera, so to get the black and white look, I used an editing filter to knock out all the color information. But I'm not using normal lighting conditions. I am filming in monocolor light, sort of like the makeup challenge people did. Now, question time. My eye, skin, and hair color haven't changed. Based on that cone comparison stuff we talked about, what color do you think I'm filming this in? Let's fade off that filter and find out. And just as a note, this is the sort of question that you would find in a graduate level perception class as extra credit. So if you can't work it out, that's totally fine. Look at that! It was green light this whole time. We can also do red light, blue light, or even purple light. All sorts of colors. As we flip through the different colors though, you may notice that my makeup is apparently changing. And that would be because I picked an eyeshadow pigment color specifically to get the most bang for my buck. Which brings us to a different makeup video. Sort of. When things were shot on black and white film, there was a lot of science as art in getting things to look right. You may have seen the image of the Addams Family TV set, where everything is decidedly kooky, but not in the way we typically think of for the proto-goth family. So, you can use weird colors to get things to look normal, or you can take advantage of the medium's constraints to help out with practical special effects. One startling example of this is from the 1931 film adaptation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So as you watch this next clip of the transformation from Jekyll into Hyde, think about how they might have done this. So it's really quite clever. You have red pigmented makeup on the actor for the final look, and you start filming with a red filter in front of the camera. This colors the light entering the camera to red. Like the apple in red light, it'll appear similar to something that's just light in color. And since they were using black and white film, all they could really capture were differences in brightness. Then, when it's time for his transformation, you change from the red filter to a green one. Green filter lets green light through, and red pigment would not be reflecting that, and so it appears dark. And the end result is an amazing example of practical effects. Final piece of goofing around with my fun lights. And we're going to go to VTuber levels of zoom here. What color eyeshadow am I wearing? To help illustrate the effects of the different colored lights on what's reflected, I'm going to make half the screen black and white. And while we're here, let me talk about what's going on with the apparent changes in image brightness. I'm using a digital camera that uses a CCD sensor to pick up light. But the CCD is not equally sensitive to all wavelengths of light in the visible spectrum. This sensor is most sensitive to green light, with sensitivity dropping off as you move away from that peak. Blue is pretty close to green, but red is further away. So to get the same recorded brightness out of this light that's further away from the peak sensitivity of the sensor, you have to boost the intensity of that light. Back to the crazy light show. Have you figured out my eyeshadow color yet? For the reveal, let me pop in some white bulbs, because these light bulbs, while they're good for color, their white is kind of yellow. 8 out of 10, would still recommend. Ta-da! The answer is red with a little bit of green sparkle going on. So like the movie effects we talked about, I chose a red pigment because it looks light under the red light, but dark under the green and the blue light. I went with the red pigment because I would have the strongest image quality going into that black and white filter with the green light. But if I had more lights to throw at this, I could have easily done the same effect with any colored pigment and the appropriate colored light. So yeah, to answer Nikki.
Oh my god. Oh my god, what happened?
This is what happened. Putting on reddish tinted products under red light, it's hard to know how much you've actually put on just by looking at it. Likewise, James Charles grabbing the lipstick he did.
Not yet looked at the actual name, but I picked this color because it looked a little bit different tone-wise than a lot of the other lipsticks that I knew were nudes in the drawer. So hopefully this will be something fun, but something that still matches with the rest of the look.
Ended up giving a lip color he wasn't too happy with.
Ew! I just realized I'm wearing green lipstick. I put on green lipstick.
Because in that lighting, green is going to look similar to a dark red. So, that's the science for why color perception under fun monochromatic light is tricky. And that's it for this video. See you guys in the next one. Bye!